You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, where we do fast, fun, free daily deep dives into books of the Bible. And right now, we're going through Esther.
When I was in high school, I dated a girl who liked country music, and I was not country in style or alignment at all. But I mean, you know what that means. If she liked country music, I liked country music for a while. So I had my little phase. I never dressed like it, but I got into Brooks and Dunn and Dwight Yoakam, and I don't even remember who else. George Strait was cool back then. Randy Travis. I still think Randy Travis is just wonderful. And I really genuinely did like it on the side, while I still liked all the other music that I liked. My parents were both music majors and performance majors, and so I was raised around a very diverse, eclectic musical experience, and country was the one thing that really wasn't a part of it at all. And sure enough, when I broke up with that girl, I didn't listen to much country music at all after that. And the funny thing, the ironic thing, is I went to college and I ended up marrying a girl who doesn't like country music at all, but who was a country music DJ in high school. This is crazy how that works. I don't even know what the point of that is, other than to say I listened to country a little bit. It was never really my style. Wasn't really my upbringing. Well, now I really like funk and disco, kind of throwback stuff, synth wave. I like indie rock and things like that. I'm having a lot of fun putting together my little playlist. I'm a sucker for all kinds of pop if it's got a cool melody and a cool hook. Country isn't automatic to me. It's not intuitive. But every time I hear it, I think to myself, this is really good. Culturally, it's not exactly who I am, but this is great. I share a ton of the values in common with this, and I'll go on these little country music kicks as sort of a guest who partakes of country music and participates in it a little bit, but it's not like I'm putting on the boots and the hat and the shirt with the pearl buttons and things like that. That'd be fake. I don't have horses. I'm not into all of that kind of stuff. Likewise, in the Old Testament, there is this class of people who never really become Jewish. They're Gentiles ethnically, but they look at what's cooking over there on the Jewish side, and something comes up in their lives or some gigantic thing happens in the world, and they see what they're pretty sure is the work of the God of Abraham, and then they look at their little carved rock thing, like kind of jab it with a stick, and they're like, do something, part a sea, or cure leprosy, or do anything. And it just never does anything because it's a carved rock. It just sits there all the time. And some people are like, oh, I'm sticking with the carved rock. But throughout the Bible, there are a bunch of people who are outsiders who are like, all right, well, I can't be ethnically Jewish, but I sure do have the fear of their God. And I think their God is real, and I am in on that. And there's a whole list of people like that throughout the Old Testament who demonstrate varying degrees of faith as an outsider. You think about Rahab, the prostitute in Jericho. She did the math on what was going on. She feared the Lord, and it prompted her towards something good. Heck, Zeresh, the wife of Haman from the book of Esther. Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, descended from the Amalekites, the sworn blood enemy of the Jewish people. Even his wife was a God-fearer. Now, not the kind of God-fearer where then she goes and believes in it and somehow worships that God, but even she could do the math. So in the same way that culturally I cannot be described as country, still I feel a great affinity with it, and there are aspects of my life that overlap with the values espoused by country music. In the same way, there are people in the Bible who never became Jewish, because I don't know exactly how that works, but religiously did align themselves or did orient their entire set of religious assumptions out of a healthy fear of the God of Abraham. And we see that alluded to very specifically here in Esther chapter 8, when in verse 14 it says, the couriers riding the royal horses raced out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was also issued in the citadel of Susa. And so the message goes out that the Jews are going to get to fight back and defend themselves, and everybody's like, well, they're definitely going to win because now the God of Abraham is involved. And I mean, when this kind of stuff happens historically, it's going to work out. Mordecai, this is verse 15, left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen, and the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city, whenever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews with feasting and celebration, and many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. Now, on the one level, we could take that to just mean, well, they were afraid they were going to get killed, so they dressed up and acted like Jews somehow. Okay, could be. Let's assume that there were some people who were the enemies of the Jews who responded in this very pragmatic way, and we're like, "What? No, we're more than allies. Look, we got the flags and the signs and everything. We're totally on your side. There'd be no reason for us to be in a fight with you. Come on now." But I have to believe, in light of the context of the larger Bible, that a bunch of these people are the kind of people who go on to be called God-fearers. People who, again, are not ethnically Jewish, but they see the work of God and they fear the Lord, which, as we talked about last time from the book of Proverbs, is the beginning of wisdom. But when they went and looked at the Hebrew scriptures and sized up the whole thing, they realized pretty quickly that a lot of these commands seem to be ethnically singularly targeted toward God's chosen people. There's at best ambiguity throughout the Old Testament about what you do if somebody who isn't ethnically Jewish comes to worship the God of Abraham. And so this whole category of people who are Jewish adjacent spring up, worshiping the same God, but they don't do all of the dietary things. Obviously, they don't do the exclusive marriage thing, which, I mean, who would they hang out with? So they're still going to stay married to whoever they're married to, and they're going to have kids and do life or whatever. They're not a part of an ethnic people set apart uniquely for the glory of God, but they are worshiping that God. Really, the whole situation there of God-fearers, it just begs for fulfillment. It begs for a new set of boundary markers for the family of faith, something that goes beyond just the ethnic, and a family of faith where he who does the will of my Father in heaven, quoting Jesus there, that's who my brother, my sister, my mother is. That's who my family is. And so in the New Testament, we definitely see the idea of a family of faith, a kingdom where Christ is king, that involves free and slave and male and female and Jew and Gentile and Greek and just everybody of all social classes. All of those dividing walls of hostility are broken down, and the tensions of the Old Testament in situations like this are resolved in the work of Christ. But back to this concept of God-fearers, we don't know a ton about where these little pockets, these little communities first began historically, but what we do know is that it seemed to be a really big deal in Asia Minor around Sardis, which is, of course, the western capital, if you will, of the Achaemenid Empire. It was a place that was far enough away that Persian religious sensibilities didn't quite extend, but Persian order and bureaucracy and economic stability did extend. Well, also the stories of Persian politics extended that far, and I don't think it's a coincidence that after the stuff we read about in Ezra and Nehemiah and this stuff in Esther, that a whole bunch of people on the cultural fringes of the Achaemenid Empire would add the whole thing up and say, you know what, our gods have never done anything at all. Nothing. They're super unpredictable and inconsistent, and like, I hate to say it, feels like blasphemy, but it kind of seems like they're not real in any way. Whereas the Jews, they have this covenant with their God. They have this clear written record and a recollection of all the things that God has done. And when you go back and look at it, it all makes sense. Like, he does the stuff he said he was going to do, even breaking the laws of time and space. His behavior makes sense. It's like he wants all the nations to know that he's the one true God. And then there's even stuff in their scriptures that indicates that you and me, an outsider in ancient Greece, that we're invited to the party. That part of the glory of the whole thing is that we will look at this and we will see that there's something compelling to it, and that we will worship this God. And so we should just do that, even though we can't, in the most literal sense, become Jewish. And so we see these things pop up. And again, one of the places where the whole God-fearer thing is very popular is in Sardis, modern-day Asia Minor. By the time we get to the New Testament, we see that the God-fearer thing is still a thing. And Luke, in particular, of the four gospel writers, the one who seems the most attuned to Greek culture and the Greek world, he goes out of his way to allude to God-fearers in Luke chapter 7. And then there's a couple of quotes. I assume they're both from Paul, where there's, one of them's a speech from Paul. This is the men of Israel and you that fear God speech. Yeah, and so Luke goes out of his way to quote Paul using a formulation for anyone who might be interested in worshiping God that is reminiscent of several passages from the Old Testament, most notably in the book of Psalms, which is where the Bible goes out of its way to delineate, all right, you got the people of Israel, and then you've got the people who fear God. Well, why not just say all the people who fear God? Or just assume that all the people of Israel would encompass all the people who fear God? Well, because going way back deep into the first millennium BC, there were two groups of people who believed in the God of Abraham. One were people who were ethnically descended from Abraham and believed in the God of Abraham. But then there's also all these other little acknowledgments of people who saw the work of God and believed in the work of God, even though in the same way I never put on the boots and the hats and the pearl button shirts to fully align myself with the whole country thing, but yet still very much appreciate it and resonate with it. Well, so there were a whole bunch of people who, though they could never really ethnically become Jewish, still feared God. The Old Testament acknowledges these two groups, and that seems to have carried over through the intertestamental period and into the New Testament. We get the impression in the New Testament that the Jesus thing made an unbelievable amount of sense to these God-fearers who were not Jewish but did worship the God of Abraham. And I think what we're getting here in Esther chapter 8 is sort of an ancient revival within the Achaemenid Empire, where a whole bunch of people saw what went down and did the math and said, okay, well, I might not be able to be Jewish, but I definitely think that is the one true God. I better start thinking through how I want to express that and live that out in my life. Again, I'm sure some people were just afraid of Jewish people and didn't want to get killed, but I've got enough other biblical stuff to point to that I think there was something more going on here, and it's fun to think that through and kick it around. All right, I think that's plenty for today. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.